Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so very much. Again, I'm Shirley Malcolm, Senior Advisor at AAAS and Director of Sea Change. And it's my role here to begin the last of the sessions for this STEM Symposium, and it is really a pleasure for me to be able to assume this role. I've worked in this space of workforce development and diversifying the workforce for a very long time. I just had a birthday last week. I was 73. And I tell you this, my grandmother always told her age, and they said, Miss Funderburg, why you always tell your age? And she says, I'm happy to be above ground. And that's kind of the way that I feel, but for me also, it's a matter that I've worked in this space for such a long time that I remember when these programs were actually created. I was on the President's Committee of Advisors on Science and Technology in the Clinton administration, when the whole discussion came up about the H-1B visas and being able to get resources so that we could affect the makeup and the build, the workforce for the future. And we're at a peculiar time where we have jobs without people at the same time that we have people without jobs. And in many cases, this is only going to grow worse. The kind of requirements that industry is now articulating with regard to what they need, what the workforce actually, what they need the workforce to be, somehow we've got to think within our higher education institutions, 2-year and 4-year institutions, what is it that we have to provide in order to take this demographic that is coming to us now with regard to our colleges and into our colleges and universities? What is it going to need in order for them to succeed and to be able to assume these next generation jobs? We began this program with an incredible presentation that pointed out to us that, yes, content and tuition and all these things were necessary, but they were not sufficient. That the students who are coming to us now have needs to go beyond just giving them the courses and the credits that they need. The degree without the skills is meaningless. To be able to get them through this process into a life of meaning with a wage that is a living wage that can enable the social mobility that is needed. That's really what we're talking about. We moved on to discussions of the skills and experiences that we have to provide for students. What is it that they have to know and be able to do? And what do we do within our institutions to enable them to acquire these skills? One of the things we know for sure, and that is that they're going to have to be participants in a much more diverse workforce. And so how are we going to help make that possible? What are we going to provide? Then the next question is, what will work look like? I got a fortune cookie yesterday that said, and my fortune said, life is change. And you think about that. And that's exactly the case. we see shifts in the technology and the nature of work, and those kinds of shifts affect all of us. Then we began to actually hear from our students in their voices what they are experiencing. It's not just about the classes, it's not just about the courses, it's not just about the faculty, but it's about the life that surrounds all of the decision making and all the courses that they have to participate. Then the question really emerges, who are our partners? How can we work together, not just the institutions, but with regard to our communities, the industries, the government? How do we work together? How can we be informed about the workforce of the future and use that information in order to build programs that can support, educate, empower our students, give them the confidence that they need in order to really forge ahead? What's coming? We don't know. Change is life. Life is change. But whatever is coming, we've got to be able to enable, we have to enable them to deal with whatever that change is going to be. We have glimpses of what that's likely to look like, but we don't necessarily know for sure. One of the wonderful things, again, about getting old is that you happen to have the opportunity to meet and to interact with people that you've known for a long time. And even though Dr. Kamau Bobb is a young man, we have known each other for a long time. He is a national authority in STEM education, founding senior director of the Constellation Center for Equity and Computing at Georgia Tech. One of the things that we do know is that computational science is going to be a part of whatever it is that we do. And those of us who are older, we're going to struggle with that. I got a new phone day before yesterday. It's killing me. So he's at Georgia Tech. He spent time with the National Science Foundation. He's hung out in the policy world. He understands a lot about how decisions do and do not get made. He's an engineer by preparation and attitude, mindset, and also a science and technology policy scholar whose work focuses on the relationship between equity for students and communities of color in the STEM enterprise, large educational systems, and the social and structural conditions that influence contemporary American life. So for me, this is a real treat to be able to bring to the stage and bring to this audience someone who has put these pieces together over the years, begins to understand how we're going to have to help people to have a career and to have a life in this new workforce of the 21st century. Kamau.
Good morning. Good morning. How are y'all? Thank you for having me. I am thrilled to be here, as you know. Shirley is a I think, almost 30 years older than I am, since we're talking ages and such. I am also, in the context of age and all of that passing of torch, there's some other colleagues, Donna Llewellyn here as well. I met Donna and Shirley about almost 20 years ago when I was starting at Georgia Tech as a student. So I went to Berkeley, I did engineering and all that there, and then I ended up finishing my PhD at Georgia Tech. But what was interesting about that was I think Shirley was on the advisory board of the school that I was in at the time. And as you know, there are these legendary people out there. So when, at that stage, she was introduced to us as students, it's Dr. Shirley Malcolm, and we were like quivering. Like, that's the lady? Because we had to read her work in order to prepare for exams, etc. So to be introduced by her, as you can imagine, is a sense of arrival and anointment, and I really feel special. So what I would like to do is just a couple things. I know that the nature of the work that you all do has been ongoing for a long time. I also think that the basic premise of what the STEM Fellowship is about is something that's well understood. Students who are challenged in various ways need support in ways that other students don't. So all of that is kind of understood. I think that your commitment, obviously in an environment where higher education is under duress, needs to be said explicitly and acknowledged and appreciated. All of us, the things that we do, I don't think that people really understand the difficulty of it if you're not involved in it directly. But that said, what I want to do is to frame it a little bit. Those things that Shirley alluded to about the future of work, about the nature of skills that are necessary to play, all of it, I think, is part of a landscape that we need to be intentionally considerate of right now. Here's the way that I see that. We have a risk, I think, of being disconnected. And let me give you an example. My bio is not fully articulated, so I'm an immigrant, child of immigrants. I got multiple jobs. And one of them is I'm the global lead for diversity research and strategy at Google. I was taken out to this meeting the other day, and on the flight to LA, the lights wouldn't go off in the, bear with me with this little story. The lights wouldn't go off in the Premium Plus cabin. Mind you, the flight left Atlanta in the day, so this was a daytime flight. And for some reason, the cabin lights wouldn't go off. About 2 hours into the flight, the stewardess comes up and she says, I want to apologize for the inconvenience and give you 15,000 miles for your inconvenience. So I was confused. I didn't know what the inconvenience was. And so she said, for the lights not being able to go off. So I was like, okay, whatever. But for real. Then I had to show her my boarding pass on my phone. She flashed her little wand, and I got 15,000 extra miles. It was crazy. Then I go to this meeting, and I was given a backpack for showing up. And then I showed it to my daughter when I got back, and she was like, yo, this backpack slaps. You have no idea what this backpack, I didn't really know. I knew that it was nice, but I didn't really appreciate how nice this backpack actually was. And in the backpack was a pair of shoes. Apparently these shoes are made out of wood or something special. So let's think about what that means. I go out there, I get 15,000 miles extra on a trip that I didn't pay for because the lights wouldn't go off in the day. Then I go and get this slapping backpack with a brand new pair of innovative shoes that are made out of wood, apparently. I didn't pay for any of it. And then, when I was leaving the meeting in LA, I had to step over all the homeless people that are around this building. The tent cities in LA, as you well know, the homelessness there is, it's gross. It's all over the place. You see people everywhere. Similar to San Francisco. I've been in San Francisco not too long ago, and I hadn't been there for a long time. I was walking up Market Street by the Embarcadero, and you're literally stepping over people to just walk on the road. So they don't have the tent phenomenon as egregiously as they do in LA, but they have people just everywhere. It hurts to walk through there. So the reason I bring those two bookends up is because of the risk of disconnectedness, where the nature of the things that we're doing, the level of education that we have, the access to the kind of life that it gives us, the risk that we run is not being connected to the rest of us. And I think the nature of what we're doing is such that it's such a grind. It's so difficult. We're trying to interpret and comprehend what the next kind of education will mean. We understand the importance that higher education is the portal between having and not having. So we're involved in that part of the matrix. But it is important to step back for a moment and think about the tension that the country is under and the role that we play in it. Here's another example. I just came back, and you gotta forgive me now, so this thing makes me a little angry. But I just came back, came here from Atlanta, and earlier this week they fired the superintendent of Atlanta Public Schools. Her name is Dr. Maria Karstarfin. There may be some reasons that they did it, I have no idea. But the thing is, that public school system, it's in the middle of Atlanta. And as you well know, that is the city where it used to be called the Black Mecca. For those of you who don't know, it used to be called the Black Mecca. It's one of the few major metropolitan areas left in the country where there is actually a huge black population that's viable, and there are others as well. And what's interesting about the Atlanta public school system itself, of those 52,000 odd students that are in it, 77% of them are poor, qualify for free and reduced lunch. Another 74% of them are black. But the median household income for the black students in the Atlanta public school system is $24,000 a year. For the white students in the same system, it's $167,000 a year. Let me just repeat. The median, for all of you mathematicians, the median household income for the black students is $24,000 a year, and for the white kids in the same school district, $167,000 a year. Now, what framing of a public educational institution is capable of handling a rift that's that big? And then the assumption, presumably, is that we're going to, out of that morass and disparity, equally prepare students to come to our level. It's impossible. We know it. We have to be able to say it out loud. The kinds of wraparound services, the wraparound experiences, the richness of life that students whose families make $167,000 a year, there's no way that any school system can bolster that for those who are only just barely surviving. And they also know, they also know that if we're thinking about it earnestly, what does it mean for a kid who's broke? I mean, we like to use these fancy terms of socioeconomically challenged and what have you. They're broke. They're living in a city where they're selling homes for the 1-point-something million. I've been talking this talk a lot. And I don't really understand. I mean, the more and more I say it, the more difficult it is for me to appreciate the impact that it has on a student and their ability to learn and understand the complicated things that we're talking about when they're seeing signs for homes that are being sold for $1 million plus and their family makes $24,000 a year. In likelihood, they don't understand what the M means when they have these kind of gross advertisements for homes from the 1.2 M's, It's insulting. And it's telling them directly that we don't want you here. And in Atlanta, the Atlanta public school system circumscribes that. So those homes that are being sold for $1 million are right where those kids live. So it's telling them that your future is not here. But yet our expectation is that when they make the transition from secondary school to post-secondary education, that somehow they're going to be equipped to battle the human wounds of being signaled to that they're unwanted, at the same time, the underdevelopment of their educational experiences, and then now they have to yoke equally with these kids to do all this STEM stuff that we're talking about. Think about where that is on the triage list if you're living in those conditions. As a personal matter, just try to convince yourself of what type of hurt these kids are carrying with them. And I think it's an interesting experience for myself. my own child, is of the privileged. We were able to talk recently about the fact that she has gone back and forth across the Atlantic 6 times in the last 4 months. It's crazy. I'm unapologetic about it, but the thing that's interesting to me about that, for example, is that it highlights the relationship between your lived experience and your ability to kind of understand that there are things to be understood. And so she now went to this camp, for example, in South Africa. And it was a global leadership camp, so it was all kids from all over the continent. And what she said is that these Nigerian kids have an honor in learning. Their attitude about school is totally different. She's never seen anything like it. And I see the manifestation of that in the graduate programs in the STEM fields that we all know about. So the other quiet secret is we don't like to talk about the distinction among these particular people that we're talking about. So more often than not, when we're saying black people and Hispanic and Latinx and whatever, in the graduate programs in STEM fields, more often than not, those black people that you find are either from West Africa or the West Indies. They're not black Americans from the South. For damn sure, they're not the ones coming out of the Atlanta public school system. So that's the reality we're talking about, and she saw it herself. So she was like, look, they all know their school song, they all know the things that they're doing, they're not even afraid of being smart. Think about the implication of that. She recognizes that in her school, in her district, because of that disparity, the kids themselves are afraid of being smart. And what did it take for her to see that? She saw it when people are unafraid who look like her in other parts of the world. That's our challenge. So when we're talking about this STEM education, particularly with groups of people who are poor, who are other in some way, all the fancy words that we like to use, the reality is that we're in the middle. We're in the middle now. We're the portal between those who have the ability to play and those who don't. And increasingly, even in our own ranks, we don't have the ability to play. Since we're talking about it just for the moment in terms of socioeconomic standing, if you're an entry-level faculty person in a lot of universities, you arrive broke. You know, talk to me. When you're a grad student, you're looking for your next check. And then you get an assistant professorship in some fancy city like San Francisco for whatever, you gotta live in a bus and go somewhere else to kind of find somewhere to live. You broke too. So what does that really mean? We're trying now to deploy a set of skills in an environment where we're being pressurized by the schism between those who have and those who don't. And in order for us to have, I think, an important way to think about it is this, so we can have a little bit of a dialogue. The concern that I have at the moment, and the reason that I laid those out the way that I did, is because my fear is that we are misinterpreting the value and not considering enough the value of citizenship. And I think in this context, because education is so sacrosanct, it's so fundamental to our ability and our viability as citizens, it's our special responsibility to consider exactly what it means. And we don't get a pass because we're STEM people. We have to think about what it actually means to be a citizen. And I don't, of course, mean citizen in this kind of litigious and crass way that it's being talked about at the moment, but rather, what is our responsibility as people who coexist in the same place? Especially because we have the kind of erudition that enables us to think about the relationship between skills, citizenship, and democracy. I think that's our special charge. I think it's our special charge in particular because we're STEM people and we're operating in a period of time where somehow STEM is miraculously highly valued than everybody else. It seems as if you're a STEM person, like somehow you just float. STEM is everything. And the jokes about that when we were talking to kids is like STEM programs are all over the place. People talk about it like it's something you can sell. I got some STEM, I'll give you 2, and we got 3 for you. I mean, you know, that's how all our STEM programs work. You go market it. You need STEM so that you can have a future. And then all the families come running up, please, can I have some STEM? Can I do some coding camp? Can I do some this camp? Please, please, can I get in? Whatever. Georgia Tech, we have the summer programs for coding and so on. We open them and they're sold out in like 2 minutes. All the rich kids, they come running. So it's $500 a week, it's ridiculous. But before an hour is done, all those camps are full. Because they know we've been told that STEM education is the path of the future. If you go in to study English and psychology, people looking at you like, that's cute. You know what I mean? But you're going to be broke and an Uber driver. It's so crass that it's like it's in our lexicon that's how we talk about it. But what does that mean? It means that we can undermine the value of education in pursuit of STEM, as if it's this kind of mystical thing standing on top of a hill somewhere. But we have to make sure that our people, us, are educated, because we have to make sure that we understand the relationship between the skills that we need, the opportunity that we have, and the things that we're trying to deploy, and citizenship. That's what's at stake here. I think one of the critiques that I have of our collective set of work is that we're talking about it in terms of job force preparation. That's not the objective. The objective is citizens. The risk and the danger of having a misplaced objective in our collective work is having an array of highly trained technical workers who are profoundly uneducated. That's the risk. Let me say it clearly so we can be clear of what we're talking about. Just because you get your fancy degree from whatever school, me included, doesn't mean that you're educated. Highly skilled, highly technical, and a profound fool. You can have a lot of people like that. And here's why, in this particular moment of time, it matters. You already know where I'm going. But let me say it, since you flew me all the way up here to say it. The challenge that we have is that the division in the country right now, for somebody like me, who is essentially a child of Shirley, I haven't seen this in my life. This harkens back to a different time. Things that we've read about in history books, where my parents, my folks are from the West Indies, but nevertheless, for that generation of people who were dealing with the real animus, the real racial intolerance that this country has had to offer, the people who are my age didn't really deal with that. But we're dealing with it now. All of a sudden, it's come back. The surge of animus towards people who are other than you. And what is the thing that we have to resist that? My argument is the only thing that we have to resist this surge of animus, of racism, of all of these things that we're seeing, is the education itself. In part, the reason that it's so easy for us to slide down this road is because we've put training as the thing. We just need to be trained so we can work. The objective of some of these institutions that are hundreds of years old is not just develop workers, it's to develop critical civic people. That's what the point is. But because we haven't done it, here we are. And let's say what some of these risks are out loud. This school system that I'm talking about is part of that. The ability for a city to allow that kind of profound socioeconomic divide that's correlated absolutely with race under people's watch who ought to know better. And I know that there are no easy solutions to these problems, but to let it get that far, where we then know, what will we do? Washington, D.C. is emptying out of black people. Atlanta, emptying out of black people. Brooklyn, New York, where I grew up, emptying out of black people. And then if we go to the Southwest now and we're dealing with Hispanic people who are under duress in ways that we can't even consider appropriately. The fear that some of those kids have, not knowing whether their parents will be home when they get back or not, because they're being rounded up as if this is the Kristallnacht or something. It's crazy. This is what we're dealing with. So we can't isolate the work that we're doing from the context in which we're doing it. That's the relationship. In my view, that's the importance of what we're doing, to make the connection between civic order, civility, and education, and the technical skills that we're trying to provide. Those two things have to happen in concert with each other. And the responsibility that we have as sages, so to speak, in that educational space is to make sure we don't forget that. So I would charge you with that. I think that our work is clearly important. I think the things that we're doing are difficult. I think the structure in which we're having it done is also contracting and making it even more difficult. I think that causes us to have to be innovative. The way that we, I mean, having been at NSF, the way that we do things, for example, we've been doing it for a long time. That doesn't mean that it's the right way to get it done. So we do have to think about what these structures actually mean. The idea of supporting students, for example, who are socioeconomically challenged is not the same kind of challenge that it was 20 years ago. It's grinding now. It's obscene now. Before, you could just be poor and you make it happen. But now you're like debilitated with this poverty, where you can't function, you're homeless. The homelessness population of students who are in college is obscene in a country like this. And it's getting worse. So the way that we have our program structures are under parameters that aren't the same as now as they were when the programs were built. Let's just talk the truth so we can innovate with the right variables. Similarly, those kids are coming to school where they have no idea of what the other half is like. The reason that I wanted to begin with that story about getting 15,000 miles because it wouldn't turn off the lights, it's incomprehensible to somebody who's broke. They have no idea the privileges and the accommodations and the get-out-of-your-wayness that happens for people who are living on this side of the strata. And I'm black, and I get those things. And I ain't even like rich, I just got a job, you know what I mean? But I get flown here and there. I went to Nairobi the other day. Some dude picked me up from the plane with a sign, my name, Dr. Bobb. I didn't even like step on the ground. It was like he just put me on his back and we walked out. You know what I mean? I was like, this is dope. The last time I saw this Atlantic, it was not like this. You know what I mean? But think about what that means. And I have to be conscious of it myself. And I'm not rambling. Here I'm closing the loop. Our personal responsibility is to make sure that we don't suffer the risk of being disconnected. There's no way for me or my own child that would have you to understand that grinding poverty that I'm talking about. I've never lived it, nor will she, hopefully. However, that doesn't exclude us from having the responsibility to understand it, to try our best from the positions that we're in, especially in the roles that we play, to make sure that the parameters of what we're talking about are understood in the context of the lives of the students that we're trying to address. It can't just be that we do what we have been doing, because the circumstances around it have changed. That's our charge. Make sure that we understand that the paramount objective is citizenship. The skill sets that we're deploying are in service of that. The workforce objectives will happen along the way. Thank you very much.
You do not know how I feel as someone who's helped to mentor him over the years, that in fact, that this next generation is willing to step up and tell it exactly like it is. So thank you.
Lessons learned.
Questions? Questions, comments? Okay. While he walks to the back, he walks to the mic, or somebody else walks to the mic. I think this whole notion about context is just, we cannot talk about it enough. And I hope that you will begin to read in this space and understand what we're all up against in terms of doing the job that you know that you are compelled to do, that you're working hard at, that you have to understand the kind of pressures that surround you. Okay.
Okay, but first of all, Thank you so much for such an inspirational talk. Really, really appreciate it very much. I just want to bring, in the last few years, I've been trying to work with my students at Penn State in trying to give them a deeper context in learning and education. In doing that, I learned about a book called The Two Cultures. I don't know if anyone in this room had read that book. C.P. Snow gave a talk in London in 1950s. And the book talks about the divorce between STEM and non-STEM fields and how there is this competition between you are better than me, you are less than me, at that time. And when I read the book, it really helped me to understand and appreciate very much things that were myself in a silo. So my question to you is, do you have or have you thought about any clear, specific suggestions that we could bring into our STEM education?
I appreciate the question. I think, yes, the specific part of it in this context is a bit general. But I think the specific recommendation is that you bring the philosophy of what the objective is into the instruction itself. So the discussions that happen in individual classes, the way that the objective of classes are framed, it doesn't necessarily have to be so narrowly constrained to the specific skill set of that course, for example, but rather this is applicable to the society in these ways, so that the context of learning is oriented around a larger goal, so that in the process of doing so, that becomes a practice of why we're doing this. And that doesn't have to be so kind of brutally prescribed, but I do think that that kind of orientation, so that when students are learning, they're understanding that the reason for learning is to be able to figure out a way to make a contribution. And that's something as an instructor, as a leader, as a mentor, as a model, I think having that kind of discussion, it just kind of inculcates that practice along the way.
Thank you also for an incredibly inspirational talk this morning. I was really struck by your daughter's experience about the students who have the honor to learn and not being afraid to be smart versus students that we serve, for example, in my institution, regional comprehensive, high poverty, high first generation students. I'm curious how we in our privileged spaces can engage in the conversation with those students that we want to serve who are afraid of being smart and who don't feel like they belong. What are the things that we should be saying to those students to help them overcome that fear?
I appreciate that too, and I think that that's complicated. I think that the origin of that is to not be afraid of the privilege itself. I think that one of the challenges that appears to me is that, well, let me just be explicit. So this white privilege thing is hanging around out there, and somehow it seems that, not being a white person, I can't speak for it personally, but I think that there's a fear of trying to reach too far because you don't want to be accused of being racist or being insensitive or saying the wrong thing or what have you. And I think to some extent that's gone too far, where you have to have the courage to express the human connection as you see it, irrespective of the privilege that you have. And I think that kind of placing the priority on the human connection over the difference is the thing that people will respond to. I also think that it's an element of self-reflection, because in all of this, there's these people. They're poor and they're underserved and they're at risk. I mean, the NSF part of this is discussed. Well, that's whatever. The NSF part of this is challenging because we give you the paragraph that says we want you to serve the underserved, at risk, marginalized, blah blah blah. So it's all these adjectives, and then here comes the student, and in your head are all those adjectives. That they are underserved, they're at risk, they're marginalized, they're poor, they're socioeconomically challenged, whatever. But there's no reflection of who you are relative to them. And in many cases, that level of insensitivity is practiced, it's ingrained in the same way that I'm talking about. So who are you? And I just happened to see, and I'm sorry I'm a little charged up, but I just happened to see this thing the other day, The Pieces That I Am. It's this documentary about Toni Morrison. And I'm not saying this to you specifically, I'm saying this more generally. So what she said in answer to a question that Charlie Rose asked her, now that you are a Nobel laureate and you're fancy and Pulitzer Prize winning and so on and so forth, how does this racism stuff affect you? And she said, that's the wrong question, Charlie. The question is, how does it affect you? This racism thing is crazy. It's nuts. It doesn't make any sense. And the people who practice it are manifesting a kind of neurosis. So what happens if I take it away from you? What happens if I take that race privilege away from you? Who are you? And the way she says it was, are you as smart as you thought you were? Are you as intelligent? Are you as important? You're just out there all strung up with your little self without your race. Now what? And I think in this case, to bring this back to your question, is that the sanctity of the relationship between teacher and student, between person to person, is just the human relationship. And I just wouldn't be afraid. And if you get charged, get charged. And then they'll believe in the end that you weren't afraid, so therefore it was honest.
Thank you.
Of course.
I had a student ask me a few months ago, or talk to me about her experience with other students who would comment, I'm so broke. I can't go on a spring break trip. I can't go out to eat this weekend. And she said, no, I'm broke. I'm choosing between buying a textbook or sending money home to my mom, and I'm sending money home to my mom. How do I have discussions with the other students who perceive themselves as broke, who are using that language without alienating them about what being broke might really look like in America? So how can I have those conversations and be productive but be honest?
That's a challenge. I mean, it's a difficult one, especially in this Instagram age where everybody is just putting out their fantastic lives. So what ends up happening, so my daughter, for example, she was going to this private school for a little while with all these rich white kids. And at spring break, they're like, yo, I'm in Patagonia, I'm in Greece, I'm in Iceland, I'm in Spain, and da-da-da. And then now she's at a regular black people's school, and spring break is like quiet. You know what I mean? Like, I'm working at Chick-fil-A, and, you know, so the reality is different, and they all appreciate that. But I think that in terms of what to tell the rich ones, context matters, and that's where literacy matters, and I think that's where the education part of what I'm talking about becomes significant. So the extent to which that they're reading, they have to be forced to read, so they have experiences at least through literature of other spaces, of other times, of other places, of other existences, so that they're kind of narrowly constrained American, I can go on Delta and get 15,000 miles because the lights are off. Like, they need to be able to at least, if not through experience, through literature, and through your kind of guidance into these other spaces, be able to appreciate that.
Okay.
I'm not the moderator, I'm just talking.
Thank you so much for your powerful words regarding diversity in our field. I just wanted to make mention that, and a plug that National Science Foundation and indeed the National Institute of Health has programs such as AGAP, Alliances for Graduate Education in the Professoriate, and also IRACTA, the Institutional Research and Career Development Award, which target minorities in STEM and have issues of fixed versus growth mindset within the academia and culture to try to ameliorate these and provide paths forward for them within their own profession, and that indeed STEM programs such as the ones that we have here can also incorporate and work with these pre- and postdoctoral students and involve them in our programs and be beacons and mentors peer-to-peer, which can help address some of these diversity matters as well, I feel.
I didn't quite catch the question, I'm sorry.
I was just trying to ask that, are there programs, and these are two examples thereof, that are in the NSF and in the funding agencies that can help us work forward as we work within our own realms in academia to work within that framework to help the people?
I see. Well, I'm not fluent right now in the array of NSF programs, but I would think that in each of the disciplinary categories, depending on where you are, I think NSF is very good at making the case in the array of solicitations that they have in making sure that you take it seriously. So I was in the directorate for computer information science and engineering, for example, and when we wrote those solicitations, particularly around broadening education in computing and computing education writ large, we're very explicit in making sure that you had some equal reverence to both criteria on what it meant to be able to engage with these communities directly. So I think some of the onus is on the relationship between the funding agent and you. But specific to NSF, I think it's there, present in all of them, but you just have to be kind of aggressive in making sure that your objectives are met.
Last two.
I want to thank you again for giving such an amazing talk. I can't agree with you more. I've been always the believer that education, and most importantly, a relevant education, is critical in empowering all people. And that's the reason that I am in this profession. But I was wondering if you could comment on this observation. In the past decade, I have observed organizations such as NSF and NIH, which I have a lot of respect for, recognizing the importance of diversity and providing programs so that we can educate all the students. And I see the growth of these programs in the decade that we have been going through. Yet, we are here at a SSTEM conference talking about all these amazing programs, and we are living in a society where in my own state of California, we are treating the others, putting children in cages. The disparity is huge to me, but my observation is that traditionally, I think scientists have worked their darnest and hardest to stay apolitical. And I wonder if we need to question that. Is it enough to just educate apolitically and not make that initial change of entering the political landscape? Where are we in this right now in our environment? Where are the scientists who are not speaking? Why aren't we angry to no end? Right. Why aren't we making statements? Where are we as scientists, as citizens? And I don't think we are doing a good job in that. I wonder if you want to comment on that.
Well, you already know what I think. So I think it's time. It's time to tool up. Courage matters. Citizenship is based on courage. We have to be courageous. I'm not buying in at all to this apolitical whatever. Everything is politicized. That's what it means to be a part of the body politic. You can't somehow just separate this component of your politic versus that component of your profession and versus that component of your citizenship. It doesn't make sense to me, especially when it's obvious that science is under siege. Defend ourselves. That's our job. And I don't think that there's I'm not scared at all of making sure that we utilize the information that we have. The scientific method itself, as sacrosanct that it is, what it does is it fuels arguments. Make the arguments. Like we generate the data and then we stop short because we're scared. And I'm just not. And I think that that's our responsibility right now to do it all the way. Because it will be, I mean, these things are at risk. It's not as if these institutions can just exist forever. It's possible that they can get shut down, that certain directorates who are providing data for certain kinds of arguments can be shut down. Let's not pretend that that's not possible. Therefore, the kinds of arguments that you're talking about are absolutely necessary, and it's our time to make them.
Last brief question.
All right, so Dr. Bobb, some excellent points here. And by the way, I should tell you, my students also call me Dr. Bobb, but there's a difference there. I think it's your last name.
Hairstyle too.
Well, yeah, we wear our hair the same too, don't we? All right, now I am also the president of the Indiana State School Board Association, and some of your comments could be held as kind of tough on the public school system. And I want to tell you, first of all, that there are a huge number of dedicated people that work in the public schools. The thing that we know in the K-12 world is that the most crucial piece of convincing students to be good students and act like the students that your daughter met is their parents' attitude toward education. So my question to you is, yes, we're working really great on all of the programs that interface with the students themselves, but how do we reach those parents? Because they hold the largest chunk of influence with those students. How do we reach them and convince them that this is something worthwhile that their children need to aspire to?
I understand that, and if you would, just a second. So you're right that some of what I'm saying is harsh on public schools and teachers, etc., and I am. And I'm not self-righteous in that at all. And I don't think that I or us are immune to criticism. But I also think that what I'm raising to the level of critique is not the individual system, but rather what it's being charged with. It's being charged with trying to reconcile what I think are irreconcilable differences between the haves and have-nots. That's the critique, not specific to the inadequacies of a particular teacher, which if we wanted to get into, we could. That's a different issue. But what I'm critiquing is what we have charged this variable of public education of reconciling against a social infrastructure that it wasn't designed to address. That's my critique. But to the parents' point, I think it's connected to the question that our colleague asked earlier, is now we're trying to deal with talking to parents whose experiences we don't understand. The folks that are in my own daughter's school, I'm looking at some of these people coming into the class, bringing their kids into school, for example, and they're coming in house shoes and all kind of crazy shit. I'm like, yo, I don't even understand that. And the reality of the existence that they live, their articulation of support, love, and candor with regard to their children is spoken and demonstrated in a language that's not the same as mine. It doesn't undermine the commitment that they have to their kids, but they're addressing it in a different way. But I have to be able to understand that. So for example, when you're seeing some of these parents coming in into schools and they're upset about the condition or whatever it is that happened to their kid, the stress and all the stress factors and so on that are going on in their homes, it comes in to the parents. I mean, we're all in a little closed environment here, so the parents will come and be like, what the fuck are you doing? I mean, there's all kinds of crazy things. And the school's automatic response is that these parents are incorrigible and their kids are incorrigible and all of them are crazy. But when the white parent comes in, it's like, I need you to make sure that my child gets into International Baccalaureate. It's the same thing, but it's expressed in two different languages. And so therefore, it's not that the parents are not encouraging their kids to go to school. It's in part our weakness is interpreting the language in which they're expressing it. And I think that's where some of the sensitivity comes in about reconciling these differences between these and those. It's the same thing. But then the other part, which to close this out, is that I really don't understand what it's like to deal with the stress and pressure of not being able to know whether or not my lights are going to be on. And then you coming to me talking about computer science, I'm like, yo, what? I don't get it. So therefore, I think some of the burden is on us to be able to understand what those kind of facilities necessary to support students in the ways and under the constraints that they actually are.
I want to thank Dr. Bobb again, but I want to thank those of you who are out here who are doing it every day, facing it every day, and I want to thank the people who ask the questions. We don't tend to have this kind of candor in a lot of our interactions. We skirt things around, we basically talk in code, we do all kinds of things. I haven't met a parent yet who did not want the best for their children. And that was when I was teaching, when I meet them in other kinds of places. Oftentimes the difficulty is they don't necessarily know what the best looks like and therefore how to fight for it. We have issues within our K-12 system. You're absolutely right. We have issues that are basic, like the fact that even the way that we assign teachers, we don't put our best teachers in our most needful places. We don't have a lot of diversity among the teaching profession, even though the research tells us that if a black kid has the opportunity to have a black teacher within those early grades, that they have different outcomes. And that the kind of way that we organize, we don't do what we know. And I said to somebody, there's actually a name for knowing better and not doing better. It's called malpractice. And so this is an opportunity for us to be very intentional going forward, understanding what we need to do in order to move forward. And I thank you all so much for the work that you're doing. And I will leave the podium and turn it over to Dr. Wagstaff.
These two are hard to follow, so I will just say thank you, Kamau. Thank you, all of you, again, for your hard work. Thank you for your active and engaging participation in this symposium. And all I have is the last Twitter announcements. the Twitter prize winners, Purva Dakar, Kavita Mitapali, Ganesh Tiruvanam, and George Harper. And again, no announcements. I just wanted to say thank you all, safe travels, and we hope on behalf of AAAS and NSF, I also want to thank the Hyatt staff, our servers, PSAB staff. We hope this symposium has been helpful to you. We hope it's been useful. Please complete your evaluations. That's the only way we can have your feedback and your input and your assessment. So we hope this has been a very beneficial, useful, and engaging symposium for you. Thank you and safe travels.